What first got me looking for the truth in Hollywood was this movie, The Man Who Would Be King, starring Sean Connery and Michael Caine. Aside from the obvious illuminist and Masonic overtones, there seemed to be a strange undercurrent. It was almost as if Rudyard Kipling was trying to tell you more than it seemed, but simultaneously exercising restraint. I became convinced that he had embedded a deeper, darker story, so I watched The Man Who Would Be King again with sharper, a little bit more sensitive eyes. And since I was on the lookout for a deeper story, and since Rudyard Kipling provided one, I found one. I noticed how it seemed to be the story of a false messiah coming to earth, being mistaken for a divine being, ruling, and eventually being judged and exposed. I found it interesting, and I must admit a bit baffling, that Rudyard Kipling, being an Illuminati insider, would tell the story so that Satan and the Antichrist, if that's indeed who they were, weren't heroes. Because of course you'd expect a Satanist to make a hero out of the one he worships. So instead of depicting them as heroes, he depicts them as two less than noble gentlemen who get lucky and then get judged. But at that point, that's all I really took the movie for. Well, 2 months later, I was reading the Book of Enoch, and it seemed like deja vu, like I had seen or heard this story before, and indeed I had. It was just in the movie. And that's when it hit me that Rudyard Kipling, and that's exactly where he was going with that story. He wasn't just telling the story of Satan and the Antichrist, nor was he just telling the story of two Englishmen. He was telling the story of the fallen angels from the Book of Enoch. But Satan and the Antichrist are fallen angels, at least according to my knowledge, so maybe he wasn't telling two simultaneous stories. He was instead telling the same story, and it just seemed like two, separate stories at once because, the Book of Enoch and the Bible tell the story slightly different and use different names, etc. Well, I thought, hey, that's an interesting connection that I made, and it's just like them to throw it in our faces that they intend on setting up a single world leader, and he's going to also dual role as a religious leader, and just really throwing it in our face. Because I was so deep in the New World Order studies by this time that I was kind of jaded and desensitized. It didn't really shock me. The only thing that did shock me was the fact that how Rudyard Kipling depicted these two characters, not as heroes, but as bums. You know, hidden in plain sight, honoring the gods, predictive programming, that's all I thought the movie was about. Until I saw this.
And in fact, this Tuatha De Danann, who went by the name of the serpent priests, in Egypt they had a serpent race, a serpent culture. But their name was the Jedi, or the Jedi. Now where we heard that term before? And the Egyptians noted them as a race of magical druids with special powers.
According to the Masonic reference works that you can get in any library, the, the Freemasonic orders of Europe said that there was a little ideologue, a little spiritual entity that gave the knowledge to what the Masons call our hidden masters. That's what Freemasonry refers to, those who lead world Freemasonry. They don't know who they are. No Freemason knows who the actual leaders of the world organization are. They call them our hidden masters. Well, according to the reference works, there is a little spiritual entity that guides the world Freemasonry, and they call him Yoda. And in the reference works, you'll see this little creature with the pointed ears, and he's called Yota. Yota goes back to Judah, or Judah, which goes back into British Israel World Freemasonry, going back to the time of the founding of England.
Now, George Lucas making a hero out of this character obviously didn't raise the eyebrows of most, but it did mine. I was taken back by the fact that the descriptions were the same, the name was the same, the fact that he was regarded as this Pez dispenser of wisdom. So I thought that there must be something to Star Wars too, or at least something more. And that's when I remembered that, according to the Muslims, the Antichrist likes to hang out with a big furry creature, a creature so hairy that one could not tell his front from his back. And I said, well, that's easily Chewbacca. So I said, let's assume, just by induction, that Han Solo is the Antichrist. Let's just put him in that role. And I was already aware that Sean Connery in The Man Who Would Be King was actually the Antichrist. So I wondered if the two had anything in common. Well, needless to say, the two characters lined up perfectly, and I knew I was on the right track. So now I had the Yoda connection, the Jedi connection, the Chewbacca connection, the weird Harrison Ford / Sean Connery connection. So now I'm thinking, wow, Star Wars is absolutely loaded. And I wondered if there was anything left to find. And so then I watched Star Wars episodes 1 through 3 with, kind of a biblical struggle frame of reference in mind. And that's when I stumbled upon yet another connection: Anakin Skywalker, aka Darth Vader, aka Jesus Christ. And then, knowing the Illuminati like to reuse actors, I looked into the profile of Pernilla August, which was the woman that George Lucas chose to play Darth Vader's mother. And it turns out that she played as Mary in The Mother of Jesus in a movie with that same name, Mary, Mother of Jesus, that same year. Well, by now I'm thinking, damn, George, give us a little credit, man. We're not all retarded. And I don't know what Star Wars fans usually do with their Sundays, but I can tell you what they don't usually do with their Sundays. And it's actually kind of sad that I was the first to notice all this, not being a Bible thumper or a Star Wars fan or anything. And I can't shake the fact that suspicion that George Lucas had to wait, a while for the Star Wars prequels, because there was no way that the people of the 70s and early 80s would have missed all the Jesus Christ slash Darth Vader connections. It's like he had to wait for a generation who knew nothing about Jesus in order to put out the last 3 movies that he did. Either way, it ended up being a huge piece of the puzzle. And guys, on a personal note, I was never quite sold on the Jesus as Savior bit, and that's an understatement if there ever was one, because I was never sold on his existence at all. So needless to say, Savior and Messiah was out the window. And the very first time I was asked if I wanted to stay home or go to church that day, you could bet I slept in. But then I find out that the illuminated ones believe in his existence. They just don't like him. It's not that the Illuminati don't believe in God, they just don't like him, apparently. So these days, I don't even know what to believe anymore, folks. As time went on, I continued to accumulate retellings of the man who would be king in Star Wars. Eventually, all these movies would be distilled and woven together in the documentary that you just saw. Stargate and The Road to El Dorado were just blatant copies of the man who would be king, but were far enough apart from each other, both in genre and in time and in demographics, to not be detected as retellings, at least up till recently. And this whole thing is just a testament to the Illuminati's psychopathic behavior, leaving behind clues and connections as if they wanted to get caught. Symbols, signs, clues, all these things are typical of the psychopath. Scarier still is the fact that I'm not exactly a movie buff. Before doing this documentary, I had only seen one of the 6 Star Wars, none of the Harry Potters, only the first 2 Matrixes, never saw Dogma, had only vague memories of Stargate, and had never even heard of the man who would be king or the Road to El Dorado. So I can only imagine how many copies of this story must be still out there. And I've already found a few since making this, but I just don't have a documentary to back it all up. Now, let's look at the details.